for George Washington University's program on extremism. We may not have known about Christopher Hassan's alleged domestic terror plot. The Coast Guard lieutenant and self-described white nationalist was arrested last week after investigators found a cache of weapons, ammunition, and steroids in his home that investigators say he stockpiled to launch an attack targeting Democratic politicians and members of the media. A list eerily similar to people that Donald Trump routinely goes after on Twitter and in his rants to the press. It took until Friday afternoon for Trump to react to the news. And even then, Trump didn't seem to understand the effect that his language has.
When were you briefed, sir, on the Coast Guard member who was arrested for threatening Democrats and other members of the...
I'm actually getting a very final briefing and a very complete briefing in about 2 hours after this.
Do you have any thoughts on this man?
I think it's a shame. Yeah, I think it's a very sad thing when a thing like that happens, and I've expressed that, but I'm actually getting a very complete briefing in about 2 hours.
Do you think that you bear any responsibility for moderating your language when it comes to that?
No, I don't. I think my language is very nice.
Joining me now is Daryle Lamont Jenkins, co-founder of the One People's Project and consulting producer on the short film Skin, which is up for an Oscar. And Malcolm Nance, executive director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project and author of The Plot to Destroy Democracy. Thank you, gentlemen. Malcolm, Christopher Hassan he worked at Coast Guard headquarters. He put out a manifesto saying he wanted to create a white homeland. He wrote to a white nationalist, a known white nationalist who's not named in the indictment. And then some of the other things he did were to go after a list of people that Trump sometimes goes after. People like our colleagues, Joe Scarborough, Chris Hayes, and Ari Melber, people at CNN, Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo, Van Jones, a bunch of members of Congress, Richard Blumenthal, who Donald Trump frequently goes after, Tim Kaine, the former VP nominee, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris, a lot of people who are running for president, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's not running but is frequently a target, Ilhan Omar. So you could just go through this list of people. One of the things that was that sort of stood out was that when he went after what presumably is Elizabeth Warren, he called her Polka Warren. That's presumably her, but the polka sounds like the Pocahontas that Trump uses. Can you draw a line in an investigative sense between the rhetoric of this president and this kind of idea, this manifesto idea? Because it's also tied to something separate, which is, you know, actually white nationalism wanting to have a white homeland.
Well, in fact, it starts out, his writings and what he was basing his ideology on was a globalist, white nationalist belief that, you know, there should be these individual knights who will arm themselves and like Timothy McVeigh, take on the, you know, the establishment of liberals themselves. And that was typified by Anders Behring Breivik, a Norwegian who mass murdered 77,000 people, one by setting off a car bomb in the middle of the capital of Norway and then killing 69 children in order to, quote unquote, eliminate the next generation of liberal leadership from Norway. This guy believed that he was going to go out and carry out a run and gun attack where he was going to kill the liberal leadership of the United States. Now, granted, it might have been a fantasy in his head. The probability of him getting away with that is about, well, it's good, but it's not zero. And that's where the problem lies. He had an ideology in his head that is based on the hatred that we are hearing every day in the United States. And it's not the first attack. We had the pipe bomber a few months ago try to do the same thing, only in a more crude fashion. This was a very, very dangerous circumstance that we have to be on guard for all the time.
Yeah, and, you know, Daryle Lamont Jenkins, you know, we've had right-wing extremism going all the way back to the Posse Comitatus, people in the 70s and 80s that were doing standoffs with, you know, the IRS and refusing to pay federal taxes. This thing has come up again and again, Timothy McVeigh, et cetera. What you have now, the difference is that we haven't had a White House which is also, you know, kind of telegraphing the kind of messaging that then gets scooped up directly and sort of quoted. New York Magazine has a piece out right now saying that Donald Trump should stop telling hateful lies that racist terrorists believe. That's the title of it. I'll read a bit of it. Regardless of whether the Coast Guard officer took inspiration from Trump, he believed in malicious fictions similar to our president spreads and saw those fictions as rationalizations for violence. I want to quickly play a version of that. Donald Trump, this is Donald Trump back in December of 2015. 2015, talking about the media, who he used as a constant attack point, and still does.
By the way, I hate some of these people, but I'd never kill them. I hate them. No, I think, no, these people, honestly, I'll be honest. I would never kill them. I would never do that. Let's see. No, I wouldn't. I would never kill them. But I do hate them, and some of them are such lying, disgusting people.
Daryle, Lamont Jenkins, when people in hate groups hear that kind of rhetoric, do they take it literally? Do they take inspiration from it? What kind of rhetoric when a rhetoric from a president of the United States sounds like that, or at that point a presidential candidate, what does that do inside these movements?
Well, the fact that they are parroting what he says speaks to exactly what they do and who they are. I mean, when you see in this gentleman Hassan's writings that he is using the language that Trump is engaging in, then you know that we have an issue. But it's also not just the rhetoric. It's also not just the language. It's also the people that surrounds Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has surrounded himself with. You spoke of the person that Mr. Hassan was writing to, the white supremacist that wasn't named. So the Poverty Law Center did, in fact, confirm that it was a gentleman named Harold Covington. And Harold Covington, who passed away last summer, was a notorious white nationalist, white supremacist, who wanted to create a white ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the reason why I bring him up is because there are gentlemen that are involved, that are supporters of Donald Trump, that we see in D.C. all the time, that's connected to folks like Roger Stone. And when you start talking about getting that close with this kind of rhetoric and this kind of hate mongering, we have ourselves a problem that we definitely need to address.
Right. And I mean, you had Steve Bannon hired by Donald Trump both to run his campaign and then brought into the White House, who said he was making Breitbart the home of the alt-right.
Exactly.
Alt-right is a term Richard Spencer, big fan of Trump, invented because it means white nationalism. So you have these kind of, the sense of access. Go ahead.
And Richard Spencer had a friend when he was at Duke University as a grad student. His name, Stephen Miller. And we see where that comes out of. See what we get out of that, I should say.
And so go ahead, Malcolm, because the question then is that Donald Trump constantly kind of attacks federal law enforcement anyway. So they're not exactly getting support from the top. And now you have this sense that these people, even if Donald Trump doesn't mean it to sound that way, they feel they have access. They feel they are now insiders. What on earth is law enforcement to do?
Well, you know, that's a very, very good point. And that's what I wanted to talk about with regards to Donald Trump's tape. You know, when he made those remarks, that's not dog whistle, okay? That is a siren to these people. And what he says is, I wouldn't kill the media, ... And he's leaving it up to you, the foot soldier, to go out and act as an independent actor and carry out his fantasy that's going on in his head. You know, a while back when I was in the military, I went to Oklahoma City and I met the state trooper that was the one who pulled over Timothy McVeigh and took him into custody. And he gave us a little anecdote that was quite fascinating. He said, when I pulled him over and I asked him, son, do you have a weapon? McVeigh beamed at him as if, I'm with you. I'm one of your guys. And he said, yes, sir, I do. Like he was in on the plot because he was a policeman. The policeman, of course, is not in on the plot, took him into custody. These guys feel the foot soldiers of the military, the FBI, and the White House support them. And that's when that can turn into violent, murderous action. And the president really needs to stop this, or it will manifest itself in a murder.
And you know, and Daryle, both of you gentlemen are military veterans, so I'm really glad to be able to talk to both of you about this, because the other thing that was terrifying about this, when you read through the indictment, this guy worked at Coast Guard headquarters. Like, this guy was actually in a trusted position, a position of trust within our military.
Well, the person that I was referring to that is also a fan of Harold Covington, that's close to Roger Stone, his name is Jack Posobiec. He's a naval reservist and an intelligence officer. He had his his security clearance suspended right after Charlottesville, but he was still there. In fact, he was in the room when Roger Stone was getting his gag order. So we have that problem. We particularly have that problem in the military in Maryland. I went after somebody about 4 or 5 years ago who was working with a neo-Nazi named Matthew Heimbach, who was also a military contractor engaging in non-lethal explosives in a Maryland facility. He's, far as I know, he is still there. We don't know that for sure, but 5 years ago, he was working with the military, and this is, again, something that we need to be concerned about. And I will also note something else regarding the police. And I know we're running out of time here, but when you consider what's going on in Portland, Oregon today, when they found out that some of the local law enforcement was working with or corresponding with the Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boy extremist groups out there, and even allowing those that have warrants to continue on as they do, there is another issue, but that's something that Portland and the local folks are going to have to concern. But that's the kind of climate we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. And they get it in there. We remember that name, Jack Posobiec, very well. He wound up in a focus group that we did during the campaign. He just wound up there with other Republicans.
Oh, he's the load of laughs.
Yeah, Cosmic Pete.
Yeah, that's right. Yep, Comet Ping Pong as well. Oh, boy, what a world. Daryle, Lamont Jenkins, Dr. Mans, thank you. We're really glad to have you guys as a resource for this stuff. Thank you very much.